Nejmi, Alexander and I are going to be looking today at a radical new approach to something that's been looked at by lots of large organizations over many years, which is the whole idea of performance management and how you might do that differently. And by doing it differently, you might get very different results for your organization. And we're going to do that with a guest that I've had the great pleasure of knowing for 3 or 4 years now, which is Avril Somerville from Atlas Professionals. Avril, thank you so much for joining us. It's a delight to have you on the program.
Thank you for having me.
That's really exciting work.
Yeah, just to echo that, I'm really excited to get into the topics we're going to explore today with you, Avril. I mean, maybe perhaps we should start with a bit of introduction. So I would love to hear a little bit about your background, what brought you to the HR world and development world, and also maybe you could share a little bit around the current approach that you are adopting in your role when it comes to performance.
Okay, certainly will. You might need to stop me, or I could go on all day. But I will certainly try and keep it brief and relatively high level so that I'm not overtaking the questions that you have planned that you want to ask already. So my background has always been in training and development, particularly around the recruitment space, in engineering, in oil and gas originally, now very much clean energy. Atlas Professionals is an organisation which provides staffing solutions across the board in the clean energy space and the renewable space. So originally I was a coach and I was freelance for about 25 years. I can't believe it's that long. Until relatively recently when I started to go back and work full time in the leadership excellence space for organisations, and that's how I met Glenn. Was with my previous employer. So this time around, I'm very excited because I'm getting to build an entire map and a matrix for the talent development and the HR space combined. So rather than like traditionally having a separate HR department that tends to kind of govern over everything everybody does, policies, procedures, all that kind of thing, I'm sort of taking the well-being part of that HR space and tagging that onto the talent development space, which was traditionally L&D, so learning and development. And the reason I'm doing that is because after years of working as a coach and a leadership coach, etc., and working in this recruitment space, I've discovered that the traditional methods of performance management and how we measure that is really no longer fit for purpose for a number of reasons. And the main reason for me is that if we can turn that on its head and we can look at performance management as meaning managing someone's performance after the event, and turn that on its head to a different approach, which is actually performance enhancing, so that we work with the people before we have to manage the performance so that their performance is constantly enhancing. And we no longer have the need for those awkward and difficult conversations around performance management. So in a nutshell, what we do is something called a SAM process. So it's a self-actualisation mapping process. So with every employee, no matter what level they're at, no matter where they are in their careers, we create a map for them to grow through the business and develop through a succession plan. And what that map measures for these people is each point in the roadmap, at each point of the journey, we're able to say, okay, here's what we think is going to support your desires and what's driving you as a person, not just as an employee. So when we talk to people about what their ambitions are in life, for example, we get a completely different set of responses. than just what is it you want to get from your work. Because largely work is associated with making an income, and that income then generates for us the lifestyle that we want to have and the things that we want to do. So if we know each employee's ambition there and what they're interested in and what they really want to visualize themselves and self-actualize themselves as in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, for example, we're able to say, okay, so that's what you want. Let's see how we can help you get there through your career, because that will mean that your salary will increase with your competency and your experience and your ability. So we concentrate more on attitude and aptitude rather than skills.
Interesting.
So the skills themselves can be taught and learned through development programs which complement that person's self-actualization map, rather than having a suite of tools that we then say, okay, you're ready to do that now, or you haven't been trained for 6 months or so. So here's something that will throw you a little bone to keep you happy in terms of your development. And then we leave it and we don't measure whether it was successful or not, or whether it added value to the business or to the individual in terms of their output and how they feel about their jobs, etc. So for us, we look at it the opposite way. So it's about, if we enhance the performance, then there is no longer any need for performance management tools and the language that is used around performance management, which can be quite negative.
Yeah, just a bit. I just want to pick up something there, if I might, Avril, because whilst many of our listeners are in the HR space and they're HR professionals and leaders in themselves, many of our listeners are leaders from other functions and other parts of the business. You've used the phrase self-actualization a couple of times in that explanation. And you're the only person, by the way, that I know that's got self-actualization in their job title, which I think is absolutely incredible. Can you just give a sort of a layperson's explanation for the term self-actualization and sort of help the audience understand that bit a little bit more?
Yeah. So what we mean by self-actualization is that you don't just go to work to achieve the end result of going in 9 to 5 and going home, but that actually your work complements a much wider ambition in terms of your life in general and how you want to grow through life. So again, from a coaching perspective, it's about giving people an opportunity to look at themselves and to address the areas that they want to improve on, so that they improve in their jobs. And if they improve in their jobs, then their life enhancement is increased.
Yeah.
So it's about, instead of it being about the business that's actualizing, it's about the self, the person, the individual that is actualizing, rather than being told by the business that this is where you're going or what you could do. It's asking, what do you want and why do you want it, so that we could build a pathway for you to get there. Because we know that people who are happier in their work stay longer. So we hit the retention button. They tend to be more productive. So we hit the 3.5 productivity button. We hit all kinds of different things. That means that we're not having to manage performance. The performance is happening without us.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. That's a really clear explanation for that. And I think that'll be helpful for people who aren't as familiar with that kind of terminology. But I really appreciate it. And now it makes more sense why you're having conversations about what somebody wants to do as part of their life, rather than necessarily just within their career, within the job, right?
Yeah, I can give you a really clear example of that. It's a conversation I had just about 20 minutes ago with a member of staff who basically said, when I asked, why do you want more money? Why do you feel that you should have your salary increased at this point in time? Because from yesterday and today, unless you acquired more skills or some kind of experience that I don't know about overnight, why would we put the salary up unless there's a really good reason for that? So let's talk about the reason rather than the salary itself, because that becomes the issue, as opposed to something that is, well, let's look at your value and let's look at how that would bring value back to us as a business. And if it does, and we agree, then of course we can actually look at a salary increase, and we might look at that in many different ways. We might look at it by building in goals. We might look at it by saying, let's look at what you've done in the last 6 to 9 months. Let's look at your map and see how close you are to getting to where that needs to be. So if you can get to there by that time with these goals, and you achieve that, then there's no reason why we can't look at that salary. But rather than, the other way around, which tends to be, well, this person's going to leave if we don't put their salary up.
Yeah.
Where's the justification for that? We're terrified as employers these days that we're going to lose talent because somebody else is going to put 2 to 5 grand on their salary, like that. But what people don't realize is that when you make that change just for the money and not what the money represents for you, which is a different thing altogether, because that's what gives you what you want in life, right? Gives you the lifestyle you want. Then what happens is that we tend to start paying much higher salaries with increase on increase on increase. And every time somebody's promoted, it's because of salary and not because of their strengths and their performance. If that makes sense. So for me, asking that question, I got a completely different answer back from that colleague. And he said, well, to be honest with you, it's becoming so expensive in the Netherlands now to buy a first property. And I'm 35 now, and I still don't have a first property because it's so expensive in Amsterdam. And for me, I absolutely need to earn more money in order to get my own place, because my wife and I are living with our parents still.
Right.
So there's the hook. That's what the self-actualization process helps people to do, is to say, right, if that's what you really want and you really need, then let's look at how we get you there through what you do at work, and looking at your salary and looking at what we can add into that so that you earn that salary and you're adding value and you feel valued.
Yeah, brilliant. I've got about 1,000,001 questions, but I'm going to give some space to Nejmi because I know he's lined up some questions for you as well.
Well, just to comment, I mean, it feels like what you're describing is building intrinsic motivation into like performance, how performance is talked about, how it's considered, and how it fits within the business, but rather than it being like a twice a year thing that people have to do. Instead, it's about who are the which actually, so on a practical sense, when you say it's ongoing, like what does it look and feel like for like help our
because I can understand that there'll be managers out there or leaders who in different businesses thinking, well, I just don't have time to have those conversations all the time. But the problem is that if we don't have them on an informal basis and have these discussions about why people are looking at their salary and wondering about what they can afford over the next 2 to 5 years, maybe they're about to have a family, maybe they're still living at home with mum and dad. If these things are actually not discussed in an ongoing way, then by the time you get to appraisal, or whatever you call it, a QDR or whatever, a lot of people call them different types of meetings, which are development meetings basically, and performance meetings. You've got your employee here who thinks that they should have this because they've done that all year, and you got a manager here who's saying, well, I think differently. And that's because they're in completely different opposite positions, and they can't meet in the middle. Whereas if you're having these coaching conversations throughout the year on a regular basis, they might be informal, but you're still able to capture that information in their map. So we have designed a map that everybody in the organization has, and they own it. It's theirs. It's not ours, it's theirs. So they fill in their own, where they think they need to be developed, areas that they've improved on, things that they would like to do differently. Perhaps, with some people, we have people who say, I don't even know if I want to do this job anymore, but they're a real talent. And actually there might be other areas that we could move them into the business or through the business in, and they could be incredibly valuable to the business and be much happier. And we'd retain a good member of staff with the right attitude and a good cultural team fit. But if we don't keep having those conversations, we get to the end of the year and then they either leave because somebody's offered them 5 grand more, or we say, I can't justify giving you a salary increase because I don't think you're worth it, or it's not in our budget, or it's not this, or it's not that. Whereas if you're having those conversations all the time, there's no surprises, and everybody has the transparency.
Yeah, I love that. So in my past experience, no surprises was one of the leadership principles that we had, which was to encourage a similar thing, right? Like that these kinds of conversations should be happening all the time, and actually it's really important that you know your people, and you know them not just in terms of their capabilities, but actually the human that sits behind that, so that you can avoid exactly as you described, just only once or twice a year coming to this kind of formalized performance conversation, where you're so far apart in terms of your perception of where the person is and their perception of where they feel that they are, and then it turns into conflict, right? Whereas actually there's much more that you can do on an ongoing basis to avoid that, as a problem, and to give a better experience, a better developmental experience.
There's another part to that as well, which again allows the embedding of the process, if you like, what I'm calling the self-actualization mapping. And that is that what we're doing alongside this is training all of our leaders and managers in the business on how to coach through the SAM process.
Brilliant.
Because without that, you don't have the consistency. And some people might do it well and other people might not do it very well. So we do give guidelines, and we do give training and development and coaching, ongoing coaching with managers, so that they can, so you can probably hear my dog barking, it's somebody at the door. We're able to give that consistency so that managers are making sure that they're not ignoring it, or they're not trying to avoid it because they don't want to have a conflict with a member of staff, or they might feel that I'll just leave that because it's not something I'm good at, so I don't want to do it. So we give them some really strong guidelines on how to actually become good coaches, and that allows those conversations, having great conversations, impactful conversations like Glenn does with all of his clients, in a way that is ongoing, rather than something that is just once a year, twice a year, or even once a quarter.
The thing that's coming out for me, Avril, in lots of the ways that you've described the process, is it's proactive. It's proactive in terms of learning about the individual employee. It's proactive in terms of understanding them and what drives them. It's proactive in terms of having the conversations. You're being proactive in terms of how you develop the leaders in order to have the conversations. It's a very different, it's a front foot approach is how it feels to me when I'm hearing it, than performance management, which, as you both just been talking about, actually feels quite a reactive process. It's after the fact. These are lag indicators rather than lead indicators that you're working with. I absolutely love it, and I love the energy of it. But my question, I guess, is, I know it's relatively early that you're into adopting this kind of company-wide Atlas Professionals, but can you share with us the impacts that you are seeing, having adopted this approach to performance enhancement? What are you seeing at an employee level, at a manager level, and ultimately, of course, at an organizational level?
Certainly can. I mean, on a personal level, it has made such a difference to retaining really good talent in the business, but it's also made a massive difference to how managers and how the HR department support recruitment internally. In that, it's quite a robust process, and we're thinking about all these things, and we're thinking about team fit, and we're thinking about self-actualization for these individuals. We're thinking about development. We're thinking about where they could move in the business, etc., before we even hire them, so that we have a kind of profile in mind of what managers and leaders need in their business and in their teams in order to get the best out of their people. Because, as I said earlier, depending on what it is you're training, in terms of the job itself, that can be taught and it can be embedded, but the behavioural aspect of that is something that you can't buy. So at the end of the day, whilst you can train people to behave differently, the attitude and the aptitude is where you'll really get the buy-in from individuals. So we've seen our retention increase in a very short space of time. And we've also seen managers get excited about succession planning because they can see where they can go in the business. So instead of sort of, you know, that traditional sort of succession planning, oh, does that mean that I won't have a job? You know, the way we talk to people about it is, that's great, make yourself redundant. You know, because the minute you make yourself redundant, you've got somewhere else to go. But more importantly, your legacy is looked after and you're developing that person. And then that person has someone that they start working with, and so on and so forth. So you get this lovely waterfall cascading type of approach to succession planning in the business. So that the fear element has gone in terms of talent development now in Atlas, where people can see that they have very clear pathways. And if they want to go there, that's what they can do in order to get there. Here's the support they'll get on the way. But if they don't, that's also okay. Because we don't need everybody in a business to be looking at constant promotion, and, you know, not everybody's going to be a leader in the business. But we can, for example, we have just moved 5 people from the business into other departments because actually they're better in the new department and they're learning stuff that they really love. Now, we would have lost those people. We would have lost them. 2 of them came into HR, which was wonderful. So they were salespeople on the recruitment side, the commercial side of the business, and they've now moved into HR. 2 moved into IT and 1 into marketing. Wow. And they're flourishing.
Yeah, brilliant. And that has a real proper bottom line impact to the business, doesn't it? You know, the cost of recruiting new people, the time, the resource required, you know, is huge. And you if you wanted to, you could do a ROI experiment on that and prove the pounds, shillings and pence difference that it was making, right? That's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm measured against. So, you know, it's absolutely, that's the data that I collect day in and day out on a daily, weekly, monthly basis is all around that. It's all around the ROI and what we're seeing, where we're seeing the differences, and how are managers managing change, and, you know, how are they managing the attrition rates in their teams, etc., etc. So, you know, it does make a massive difference. If people feel that they are valued and that not everybody has the same succession plan, that they might be different, or that with time they will change because their values change. Of course they do. You know, as we go through our careers, our values change all the time. Some will stay for life, but others do change because of what's going on around us. And what we're trying to do is to create an environment in Atlas Professionals where these people are able to do that. They are enabled rather than disabled. I think a lot of the time organizations don't necessarily realize this, but they are disabling people by putting them into boxes all the time and saying, well, you haven't reached this target yet, or you haven't done this, or you haven't done that. And so, you know, promotions becomes all about, and commission-based industries all become about the money. When actually it's about, what does the money do for that individual? What does it bring them that's different from what they would do elsewhere?
Yeah, it feels very, very human-centered, but not in. I don't like the language, so I was just about to use. That's going to say like not in a soft way, which is not the right language. But what I mean by what I mean is that it's human-centered, but there's a really clear like economic rationale that sits behind it, right? It's not just doing, you know, taking an approach because it feels like a good thing to do. It's a good thing to do, and it delivers real economic you know, impact or value for the business, for the individuals, and everybody involved. It feels like there's a really compelling case, right? Like you build retention, you not only the cost that you avoid of people walking out the door, but also if you're finding different homes for them in the organization, you know, you're saving on some of the effort that would be required to fill some of that. I'm just thinking in terms of, so if any of our listeners were thinking, I'm an influential person in my organization, I could see that there might be some benefit in sort of adopting a similar approach, or like trying to influence that we should adopt a similar approach. What are what are the watch outs or pitfalls that you could imagine they might need to overcome in order to enable a similar kind of approach or method in their organization?
I would say straight off the bat, there's the one really critical point, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, and that is that you can bring out new systems and processes all over the place, and you can have all the right ideology behind it, and you can have all the right understanding of why it should happen on a theoretical level, but on a practical level, the only way this works is if you train and develop management to embed. So embedding is all about coaching and making sure that the learning is landing, or that the conversation has landed, or that whatever has been agreed at the end of the conversation has landed and been really agreed by both parties, so that they both own it, drive it 100%. If you don't have that, you're just going through a tick box exercise. And that's where we come back round to traditional PDRs and appraisals and those types of systems that are in most organizations. That's the big one for me.
So really equipping like leaders, managers, anyone, participants of this process with the skills to be able to do that well, and to know when it's done well, because otherwise it won't stick.
Yeah, and to help them to understand from their own self-actualization perspective that as leaders in the business, that is part of their job.
I was going to ask about
Because
tying that
believe
into the
it or not-
self-actualization.
Because believe it or not, an awful lot of people who are on high salaries and are leaders in the business don't get that.
Really?
They don't realise that's why they get paid more. So yes, it is part of their job, and it really should be part of their behaviours.
Yeah.
To want to coach, or to at least bring in support that would be able to coach and to embed these behaviours and learnings.
Yeah, it's really cool. And so I love that question, which is, if I was thinking about it, how might I start to introduce it? If we drill that down to another sort of layer of granularity, Avril, and said, what would you say are the top 3 skills that your most effective managers, when you look at them doing this work incredibly well, what would you say are the 2 or 3 sort of core competencies or core skills that those managers are bringing to the table, that listeners of ours could go, oh, I've either got a bit of that, or I really haven't got a bit of that, and maybe there's a chance for me to do some development in order to get some of the results, or at least an insight into the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole cluster of words that I could use, but I think really what it comes down to is emotional intelligence. If you have an emotionally intelligent manager or leader in the business, then they understand how to listen, how to coach, how to talk when they need to talk, how to drive when they need to drive, how to sit back and be democratic when they need to listening and hearing are 2 very different things. So again, understanding the communication cycle, and that everybody's preferences and how they communicate is different, in terms of, that we all have all of the different types of communication skills. Of course we do, but most of us have a preference. And most of us are triggered by certain words or certain mirroring behaviors, etc. I mean, getting into the realm of NLP now, but in actual fact, it is the emotional intelligence and the understanding of not just how you in yourself, so your self-actualization, but being very aware and empathic of the other persons or the other people that are in your team as well. Now, you can have people who are very self-aware, but that doesn't mean that they're emotionally intelligent. However, you can have people who are self-aware, but also aware of others and the other behaviors around them. And they are far more emotionally intelligent because they will respond appropriately. And whether that's a negative response or whether that's a positive response is neither here nor there. It could be correct that it needs to be a more negative response, particularly if somebody's about to cause danger to an organization or to themselves or to the team. But it's about how they get that across, how they deliver that message in an emotionally intelligent way that will get the right response from the individual so that they get back on track.
Yeah, and that's not an easy skill set to develop, is it? I mean, we're all 3 of us are coaches That's what we do, and it doesn't surprise me that a coach such as yourself, with the experience that you've got, has come up with this model to drive performance, right? Because actually, really good coaching generates change, whether it's change of thinking, change of attitude, change of action, change of outcome. It's done well. It's a perfect lever for this. I just used an American version of lever. It's a perfect lever for this kind of work. But as we all know, because we've all been through the mill, learning coaching skills, particularly when you're under pressure for results, when you're in a salesy type environment, how do your leaders create the space? I'm not saying the conversations need to take a long time, but how do they create the space to be in the right place to have those conversations and then actually have them? How does that bit work, the practical side?
So these guys they're very disparate. They're all over the world. Their teams are all over the world. They're not all in the same places. So again, that kind of disparate leadership can be quite complex, as you know. But what they normally do in their conversations day to day, they're now including it. So it's almost as if they're just having much smarter conversations with much better outcomes. And it's by using coaching language that they're able to do that. So instead of just, maybe because everybody's having Teams meetings every day, all the time, across the world. And so when they're having a conversation with someone or the team, they will take an emotionally intelligent stance on that. And they will say, look, this has happened once before. So I think what's important is, yes, we solved this, but how can we solve this differently the next time? Yeah. And isn't that something that we talked about the last time we talked about your SAM? That's a big thing for you. And it's one of the big key objectives, and it aligns with the organizational vision. So let's look at that the next time and spend a bit of time on it. But you go away and pull together something that can kickstart that conversation for us. What do you think that looks like? What value do you think that would add as a result? So they're having those same conversations, but they're just smarter. They're not just saying, "Oh my God, I cannot believe that manager or that engineer or that scientist has just dropped out. That was £1,000 worth of margin every day for the next year. Oh, that's horrendous. Go and sort it." They're having different kinds of conversations. They're going, well, that's not great, but what can we do to change that situation, and what have we learned from it? Those are the kinds of conversations they're having now every day on Teams, on Zoom, on whatever medium it is that they're using to communicate on. And instead of having meetings about meetings, they're also putting quite clear agendas together so that people are not wondering why that meeting's been called.
Right.
So there's, again, no surprise. And I think that if people get that in advance, then they have space to think about what they would like to bring to that meeting. And that's really what self-actualization ownership's about. It's about saying, listen, I have a stake in this. I'm not just going to do this and knee-jerk because I've been told that if I don't, I might not have a job at the end of it. Or then I start catastrophizing and going down the rabbit hole of where could this conversation end up? I'm thinking, okay, so there's a conversation. I reckon it's going to be because this is maybe the second or third time it's happened and we need to resolve it. So why don't I think about how I can resolve that and take something to the table for that meeting? Now, it might not be agreed. We might not have the budget for it. We might not have the resource for it, but at least I want to own part of this process on how we solve the problem. So it's about creating solutions instead of being part of the problem.
Yeah. It feels, like you just described, right? One of the critical components is that leaders and managers are able to have these great conversations, coaching conversations, demonstrate emotional intelligence, and be able to sort of navigate their people in their thinking towards actionable, change, sustainable change or action that's different. I'm just thinking, like, how do you then as a business support like building that like community or that capability across those leaders and managers?
So I've designed a full leadership framework which is aligned to our succession planning. over the next 2 to 5 years. And I was able to do that as a result of having these SAM conversations with each and every member of the entire organisation. And so very quickly I was able to actually build a picture of what does this company actually really need in terms of its culture, in terms of how it grows in the next 2 to 5 years, but most importantly, how it protects and supports its people and how it attracts the right people into the business. And for me, doing that at the beginning meant that I was able to design a leadership framework, which is an academy approach to the succession plans in the business. And that's aligned with all the different levels in the business that people can go to should they want to move to the next level. And be a manager or be a leader or be a business unit leader or whatever. So, we're able to, so I've designed the programs that fit into that line of succession, if you like, in the business. And that works very well for the commercial side of the business because, of course, they're very driven by bonuses and commission, etc. But I've done exactly the same for the non-com side. So I've done the same for the infrastructure side of the business as well. So your IT, your marketing, your payroll, my team, HR, talent development, etc. Because they too need to see that the value they bring to the business doesn't necessarily come to them as ka-ching in terms of here is commission for that sale, but the value for them comes from being incredibly valued by the business because of that one special thing that they do, that speciality that they have, that they do, but they do it brilliantly. And it's all about I hate to say it, and it's quite an old-fashioned term now, but I still think it stands today, and that's in-service leadership. A lot of businesses are still working along this sort of hierarchical type of business where they don't really communicate unless that means undermining somebody else, or they've gone around the wrong route and circumnavigated where they should have gone in order to get an answer for something. Or to seek advice for something. So this is a different way of communicating as a leadership team. So people reach out to each other across from comms to non-comms now all the time. Right. They never did before. They say, "Oh, do you think will it be okay if I speak to the finance director?" Yeah, go ahead. So there's a completely different way of communicating across the leadership.
Yeah, and I've got a question. I don't want to, because it could be another whole conversation. We might just have to have you back, Avril, and we'll have another conversation at another time. Because I'm mindful how busy you are, and we're sort of running out of time. But just briefly, if you might, can you just talk to us about? It's clear your passion, it's clear your knowledge, and why you might put this in front of the organisation. What did it take from the exec leadership of the organisation to say, yes, that's the way we want to go? Because it would sound to me like this is quite radical. There would be lots of organisations where this wouldn't fly, I guess. But you've not only used your influencing skills, I'm sure, but also there must have been some reception, a decent reception on the other side, right?
Yeah. So without going into too much of the sort of how the business is set up, etc., and the investors, etc. So I've gone through this process before, about 10 or 11 years ago, with another organisation that was a small one based in the UK, and I was brought in to support building a global growth strategy, which was centred around leadership and leadership coaching, training, etc. And it was hugely successful. And as a result of that, the person who brought me in at that point, who's also quite a radical thinker, just called me up literally and said, I'm going to start working with this organisation. It's very similar to what we did before. I don't want to do it without you. Can you come on board? So it was very easy for me to actually, I didn't have to sell myself to the exec side or the board at all, right. Because the evidence was there from the previous from the previous work that I'd done, and he had brought the CEO,
Right.
had brought in the value add from his end, and knew me anyway. So we'd worked together before we knew it would work. We knew that if together we could communicate to the influential people in the business, including the board, that trust us, this is going to work, here's the evidence to support it, that they would let us do it. So it wasn't actually that hard. However, I recognise that in other organisations it might well be. Sometimes I have to work a lot harder to get those results. Even as a freelancer, I had to do that. As a consultant, you'd have to work really hard to go out there and explain to people, look, this is a different way of thinking, but if you do, this is how it will benefit you, etc. So, it's not 100% ironclad that there's a little pack you can show people and they love it and they go, what does it cost? Bring it on. You do have to actually dig into their business. You do need to understand what it is the business needs. And you do need to look at holistically, not just the way the business operates in terms of its operating model, but how it develops its people and how it measures growth. Because without knowing that, you can't pull together this. Yeah. It does in a way that's really practical and is going to be compelling. So the more information they can give you, the more compelling this type of work will be in terms of HR and the development space.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's super helpful. And it's also for those people who are listening thinking, I'd love to take something like this to our leadership and sort of try to at least start the conversation. The wonderful thing that you and your team and the wider business have done is you've planted that flag in the sand for everybody to have a point of reference. So I think it's, if there were people who are itching to try it, hats off to you, honestly. I think as a pioneer in that space, you've got a point of reference that you've created, and that should be highly lauded. Thank you. I'm just mindful of time. Nejmi, anything more from you before we let Avril go back to a day job?
No, just to echo what Glenn just described. I think what you're describing, Avril, I've seen the symptoms or the pain of the other kind of approach, the traditional approach, and what you're describing seems to remedy that, right? It's about actually bringing the human, putting them at the center of what performance looks like within the organization, what development looks like for them, and that's in line with the strategic aims of the organization, building a model so it's not just like performance for the sake or management for the sake of management. When it comes to performance, it's actually just an intrinsically built into the fabric of how we lead and how we manage, which is absolutely to be applauded. I think it feels to me, a bit of bias, but it feels like the right way to think about how development should happen. And you've got like a business case that sits behind it, right? Like a real economic impact.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the best ways to really get that across to a C-suite team is to get them in a room and show them what that looks like for them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, sure.
And that sells itself.
Brilliant. Very well. That may be the conversation we need to have next, which is how organisations might go about doing that on a regular basis. That's for another time. Avril, from both Nejmi and I, honestly, thank you so much for taking the time out of what we know is a very busy schedule, but also just being inspirational in the space and really, taking a risk, but calculated risk, but a risk with all your knowledge, and then turning something that organizations do a lot of complaining about but don't seem to have resolved. You've gone a really long way to doing that, so thanks ever so much for sharing that with both Nejmi and I and the Impactful Conversations listener. I hope we can have another conversation with you at some point in the future, but really thank you so much.
Definitely, and you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.